everyone, I'm Allie Buckman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to be doing a combo video for you today, both making a beaded bead as well as a rope to put it on made out of herringbone stitch. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually teach you how to make this beaded bead. The beaded bead I'm going to change up a little bit as we make it because I think it's going to look prettier in two different sizes. And it's going to be made with 11 OC beads and 15 OC beads. And then we're going to use some 3mm and 4mm Czech glass to make that beaded bead. If you need any of the materials for the beaded bead, there's going to be a little link on the left-hand side that shows the different links for the materials that were used in this video to go to those categories in case you want to get any of those items. Also on the drop down underneath this, there's a little description or show more button underneath the video. You can go there too to get a list of the materials. For the beaded bead here, I used an Aqua AB, and we sell tubes actually of these 4mm Czech glass beads as well as strands, but that's what I used in this example. Made some modifications, and that's what we're going to do with the beads that I have here. For the beaded bead, I am going to be using 11 and 15 beads. The 11 OC beads that I've decided to go with are the Duracoat Galvanized Champagne. They're a lighter gold color and they just kind of have a nice little pop to them. I'm going to be using that golden color and highlighting it with a 15 OC bead. And this 15 OC bead is the metallic mix, which is a Czech coating on the Japanese Miyuki seed bead. That's going to highlight some of that darker color that the rope is going to become. For the Czech glass beads, you're going to need 10 of the bead that you're using in the center if you choose to do it the same size as this beaded bead here. And those 10 beads that I'm using are going to be the pearls here, and these are Czech pearls, and they are coated, and I'm going to be using again 10 of them, and they are in the Navajo color, that Navajo white, which is actually a little bit of an orangey tone to it. I'm going to highlight that pearl on the side with 20 of my 3mm faceted rounds, and these are in the crystal orange rainbow color. Those will go down the left and the right side of the pearls. In order to do the rope here and to decorate the rope, I'm going to continue with that same color and have just a little bit of bead addition in it as I was playing around. I'm using the 8 OC bead in the matte metallic dark bronze, and I like that matte to contrast that shine of the pearl. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of shine in the whole rope itself by putting a 15 OC bead in the middle of the rope on all sides. And this is the galvanized dark yellow. I think that's going to complement well to that champagne. I'm going to close it all off with a cup button, and this is the Aztec gold cup button going with that kind of golden and matte theme. It's going to work really nicely. To string this whole entire project, I'm going to be using 0.006 wildfire beading thread, and I've chosen the green color for my color palette. You do see the thread a little bit when you're working with herringbone stitch, which is going to be our actual rope portion. So try to pick a color of thread that is going to be close to whatever size 8 OC bead you use. Needle-wise, you can work with a size 12 or a size 11. I have a size 11 beading needle here, a tulip brand needle. You can do a lot of it with a size 10 too, but there may be a time where it gets kind of tight when you're working with the beaded bead. You might want to switch to a 12. I'm working on a bead mat here, and I have two different colors of bead mats usually that I work with, and I have kind of right here a blue one and a yellow one. Pick one that makes it easier for you to pick up and look at your projects. I have a thread burner handy. This is the Wildfire cord cutter. Some super new glue, which is going to be a fast drying super glue to kind of glue the ends together. And then handy, I usually have a pliers to help me flatten out my wire or flatten out my cording in order to string my needle easier. Like I said, we're going to be starting out with the beaded bead section. You can do these together, you can do them independently, and you'll be able to actually remove the bead from the corded section, so you can make multiple slides, take them on, take them off. That's up to you. If you do have something bigger that you want to put it on, say a kumihimu or something that's done a crochet, you can make the beads a little bit bigger too as we work on it. So to start out, I want you to make little piles of your beads. We're going to be working with our beaded bead colors. So I'm working with my 11 and my 15-0, as well as my Czech glass 3 and 4mm rounds. So my beaded bead that I'm going to be working on is based on right angle weave. The right angle weave is going to be 10 rows long and 3 rows wide. However, to get that curvature and that kind of tubular shape, we are going to be decreasing and not having the same size on each side of our right angle weave. We're going to start with our center row of right angle weave and then do our side weaves, and on the very last step we're going to add our beads on into the project. So my right angle weave is based on groups of 4 basically. We're going to be making little boxes out of the right angle weave, and for the center row here we're going to be doing it actually 3 beads wide and tall. So it's going to be a square. It's going to be 3 beads total. So you're doing 3 by 3 by 3 by 3. Hate to say it long, but you're doing those 12 beads all at once. I have about 24 inches of thread here, and I have a stop bead put on my thread. The thread with the stop bead here is just a white bead, and my needle goes back through the stop bead 2 times. You're going to see thread on the outside, and that needle is going away from that little stop. I have about 1 inch left on my thread, and that is for me to tie off. I'm not adding a clasp or anything to this, so you just need a little piece in order to tie off. Again, we're going to be doing right angle weave. If you're not sure how to do right angle weave, you may want to pause this video, check out another video, and the same actually when it comes to herringbone. I just did a very short but very clear video on how to start a tubular herringbone, so there's other videos to help you out with these stitches so you're not just jumping right into them. Again, the right angle weave stitch for the center row here is going to be 3 beads on each side. So I'm going to need a total to start out of 12 beads on my needle. There's 1 group of 3, 2 groups, 3, and 4. So 12 beads all together, and I'm going to drop that down towards my stop bead. My needle and thread then are going to go back through the first 9 beads with my needle going away from the stop bead. So it's going to come out between beads 9 and 10. And what that's going to do is pull that into a circle. This little circle that was created is what my pearl is going to sit inside of. It will become more squared shape as we continue on, but that first row is always going to look a little bit rounded. For right angle weave, we're thinking of each side as 3 beads. This is our first little square, each side having 3, and we're going to continue to build again 10 long off of this. So this here, there's 3 beads. That's my first side of my second right angle unit. I have 3 on here, and each unit creates 12 beads total. So I'm going to add an additional 9 beads, 3 more sides. Once I have those additional 9 beads on, I'm going to go back through in a circular fashion. So my needle is going on the opposite end where the thread is coming out, back through those 3 beads. That's my initial side that I'm building off of. Once I'm back through those 3 beads, I'm going to go back up 3 on the sides, and then back through the next 3. So I'm basically always going back through the original 3 and then 6 more. When I'm on the side here to add my next row, again 9 more beads go on. I'm going to sew in a round back through those original 3 beads. So I'm making that loop. I twist it in my hand just to make it easier to hold, and I'm sewing back through 3 more on one side and 3 more at the side that I'm building off of. Give a nice tight pull, and that's my right angle weave. I'm going to continue to build my little right angle boxes to be my center row And again, you can do this 10, you can do it 8, you can do it however long you want to. As you continue to build, you can round it out and see what the actual inner diameter is going to be at its highest point, and that'll give you an idea how big you want to actually make your bead so that it can sit on your rope. I'm going to continue on making some more of my little right angle weave boxes and come back to you guys after I have a couple more made. So I have 9 of my right angle units created, and I'm about to create the 10th. The 10th unit is what's going to join those 2 together and make it in a round. When I'm joining the 2 ends together, I already have 2 sides of my right angle weave, so I just need to make the 2 additional sides to my little box. When I'm making those additional sides, I'm going to put 3 beads on my needle, jump over from one side where my thread is to the other side. I'm going to go back through 3 beads that are at the very end. Kind of push that stop bead out of the way. When I pull those 3 beads in, that is going to be the 3 beads on the first side there of my right angle weave. I'm going to add 3 more beads, and that's going to close up that square. Go back through the 3 beads that you were originally coming out of, and you'll be able to see then that last little square created, and that's linking the whole thing together. What we're going to do now is make an additional 2 rows, one on either side, that's going to be a little bit smaller of a right angle weave in order to curve the sides back. To create that, I'm going to go back up 3 beads that are on the side of my project. That's going to pull that a little bit tighter after spinning around here and coming back. On the tops of this here, we're going to add 2 on each side. So the middle here has 3 beads, and we're going to be adding 2 on each additional side of my right angle weave. To start out, this first little extra box on the right hand side is going to be the same as when we were continuing to add in 10 length. However, again, instead of 3 on each side, we're decreasing to 2. So I'm decreasing, and I'm going to pick up 2 for the first side, 2 for the second side, and then 2 for the third side. So I'm picking up 6 additional beads, and I'm going to sew back through those 3 beads that I'm coming out of in a round, just like I've been doing, adding on the length in those groups of 3. So it's going to make a little bit smaller of a right angle unit there on the side. Once I have that first unit, I'm going to sew back down 2 beads, the first 2 that I added, and that's going to bring my needle and thread out to the outer edge. As I continue, it's going to pull tighter and tighter and kind of make a curvature around and bring those sides in a little bit. Now that I have my first of my right side of my right angle weave, I'm going to continue to add beads. Every time I add beads now, instead of adding 6, I'm only going to be adding 4. The reason I'm only adding 4 is because I already have 2 sides of my right angle weave done, so I'm just making 2 more sides to finish my square. 2 beads go on my needle for one side, 2 for the other side. I'm going to come back down 3 beads from the center row, kind of turn my project a little bit. Going to sew out the 2 beads that started that right angle unit, and I need to get ready to add my next unit. To do that, I'm going to go through the 2 that are on the side, the 2 that are at the top, and then also the 3 from the center right angle row. Next, I'm going to add 4 more beads, and I'm going to make those 2 sides for that next right angle unit. I'm going to pick up the 2 beads from the previous row. I'm going to pick up the 3 beads from the center row, and this is all going around in a circle. And then I'm going to pick up the 2 beads that I added. And that completes that right angle unit. Again, I'll do one more for you. I put on 4 beads, and it's just a series of figure 8s. Going down the 3 beads from the center. I'm going to go out the 2 beads on the side, up the 2 beads on the right, and that completes the right angle unit, but I need to get ready to add my next one. So I'm going through the 2 at the top, 3 on the inside. So every other you're going to have to sew around the whole thing, and then this one here, after I add my 4, I'm going through the 2 from the previous baseline, going up the 3 on the side there, and then the 2 at the top. So it's alternating whether or not you're starting at the outer corner or the inner corner of the middle right angle unit. This is going to continue the whole way around. So I have 5 right angle units here. I'm going to build 5 more, and I'll show you how I connect those that last one that I'm making. I've added 4 more rows of that right angle weave, and you can see that kind of coating shape that's going on. And I'm right back at the beginning where I have my 10th row to complete. For this 10th row, or this 10th right angle unit, I already have 3 of my sides built, so I only need to add 1 more side. To do that, I'm coming out on the outside, and I'm going to add 2 of my 11 OC beads. I'm going to go back through the first 2 that I added, down the 3 from the center, so just continuing the right angle weave. Instead of continuing out to the side, I'm going to use this opportunity to jump through the middle to get to the other side. What I'm going to do on the other side is the exact same thing that I just did here on what was the right side. I flipped that over to the left, and I'm going to build again on this side here another grouping of that right angle weave. To do so again, I'm going to go up the 3 beads on one of the sides of that center right angle unit. When I'm out there to start with, I'm going to add 6 beads because I need 3 more sides. Then from then on, I'm going to add 4 beads at a time. I have the 6 beads on, and I'm going up the 3, and that creates my first little right angle unit. I'm going to go through the 2 at the top and get ready to add 2 more sides. So now I add 4 beads because each side has 2. I'm going to create my loop in a circular pattern going through those 3 center beads, going through those 2 beads that my thread was coming out of, and then I need to get to my next right angle unit, so I'm going to go up the 2 on the side, in the 2 at the top of it, and then through the 3 in the center row. I'm going to continue adding that right angle weave all along the sides here the exact same way that I did the previous row, so that way we can get ready to add our beads in. So I have my whole casing done, all that right angle unit, and you can see that there is some curvature on the sides. We're going to bring that curvature and make it even tighter as we add beads and kind of fill in the gaps with some of our 15 seed beads. And that's why we have them laying here. What we get to do now is we're going to decorate. So whether or not you start with the side or the center, it's up to you. Since I'm already at a side point, I'm going to start with a side. When I add the beads, it's always going to be added on an angle because that's the way that it is easiest to add right angle weave rather than coming through on an angle on the side. You're going to see more thread. Side note, if you see thread in any of these connection points going straight through or here on the sides, you know that you kind of did inadvertently a cheat on the right angle weave, just spinning right around and adding the next rows. You don't want to do that because you don't want to see the extra thread that's involved. When I'm coming out this right angle unit here on this side, and this is going to be the exact same for every little square, I'm going to pick up my 3mm rainbow orange bead, and that's going to fit right inside that little area. What I want to do then is take my needle and thread that's coming out the bottom left-hand corner, and I'm going to go to the top right-hand corner and sew through those 2 beads at the top. When I do this, my thread will come out at the bottom left corner of the next right angle unit. I need to switch my needle over. You can keep kind of your finger in there. You can keep a little straw in there if it makes it easier, but that's going to decorate in that little area. The next one that I'm going to add, I add again on that diagonal, sewing through then the next 2 beads towards the center. So you're always going to be adding the beads in and sewing towards the center. From the left corner, going into the next 2 beads in each row, from the right and sewing in towards the center. That's going to add the beads the whole way on the outer corner here. So I've switched to my size 12 needle there, and I'm coming out again that bottom left corner. I'm going to go in top right corner, then going towards the left. Pull that bead and make sure it sits right on that angle. Each time I'm going around in the circle, I'm coming out the bottom left corner of that right angle unit, going in the top right, sewing towards the center. Make sure you pick up both beads and not just one. And pull your beads down into that right angle unit a little bit. I'm going to continue this the whole way around the project. And you can kind of get the idea now. This step is very common in beading, kind of filling in that right angle weave unit. And when you add it, it's going to be the exact same for each additional row that we add. And I am going to add them all going in the same diagonal direction, which sometimes you notice, sometimes you don't, depending on the bead, but I like to add them in the same direction for most of the things that I do. So again, I'm pulling tight at the end of each row, making sure that 3mm fire polished round sits in a little bit into that right angle unit. Again, it's going to be bigger on one side because one side of our right angle weave has 3 beads, where the other side all have 2. I'm going to add the last bead in here. As I add the last bead in, I'm going to get to the center row. So you can see how that kind of pulled that a little bit in. When I get to the center row, I don't want to go straight across to the center row because then I'm going to see my thread. So what I want to do is go down the side bead and just retrace your thread for your right angle weave. Once I get to the left-hand corner of my center row of right angle, same deal. Your glass pearls go on, sew through the top right corner towards the left-hand side, adding the pearls in, and they'll fit nicely right inside that little area. Again, pearl goes on, coming out the bottom left corner of that right angle unit, pick up the top 3 beads, and this one here I'm fighting with just a little bit because it has that stop bead there below it. Tuck that down, make sure that doesn't pop to the top, and there you have it. So you're going to continue going around your whole circle just like we did with the 3mm fire polished rounds, adding in your 4mm glass pearls. Once the 4mm glass pearls are in, go over to the left hand side and add in the 3mm on the left. At this point, I've added in all of my beads, and I have those 23mm and the 10 4 millimeters in. What I'm going to do is actually tighten up the sides. I did go in and add some extra thread. I always forget how much thread is needed for beaded beads. So I have an extra 3 feet of thread here that I'm working with. If you do need help doing that thread connection, you can go ahead and watch some of our other videos. Basically, you're just tying on a new piece of thread to the old one and then knotting those 2 knots together. If you are doing a project where you're going to have tension on it, then you may want to thread and weave the threads back through. But this is going to be a centerpiece bead, so there's not going to be much tension on the bead itself. What we're going to do now is turn to the side, and I'm coming out one of my side beads, my 2 beads on the side, and I'm going to seam around and pull that bead in to make it nice and tight by sewing and picking up all of the 11s that are on this side. So remember, each side of these right angle units have 2 beads. So I'm making sure that I'm picking up 2 beads going the whole way around. I'm not adding any beads at this point. I'm just sewing back through, which is going to tighten up and make this more rounded. I'm sewing back through the whole way past the beads that I was coming out of and over to the next 2. After I do this, you kind of get to see the magic occur there. You give a nice tight pull and you can see how nice that grabs on in. That's going to force those 3 millimeters to sit a little bit on the side. We're going to do the same thing and jump over to the other side. On the other side, to get there, I want to make sure that I am sewing around my right angle unit so I don't see any extra thread. So I'm going to sew in towards the middle. Instead of going straight across, even though I am going to be decorating with some extra 15-0s, I'm going to sew down one of the right angle units and basically just go around the right angle so I can get through to the other side without seeing any extra thread. Oops. Once I come out on the end here, I get to have fun sewing around that side as well. You can see here with the difference of the sides how closed and how open they look. If you do want to keep and maintain that opening, just stick a 15-0 between each of the sets of 2, and that'll maintain it a little bit more open. If you do have a wider project that you want to put it on, like I said, a kunihimo or a scarf, you could do that as well. So I'm going to sew around all of these here, picking up 2 beads on the whole outer row. And again, I don't pull really that tightly until I know I'm the whole way around. And I am going to go past the point where I started it, and 2 more beads past. Pull nice and tight, and that's going to tighten up those 11s on that side there. So just like the other side, now we have a nice tight side created, and it pulls those beads back just a tiny little bit. What I want to do now is see how it's kind of pushing down in the middle. I want to make sure to maintain the curvature and the size that I'm getting. What I'm going to do that is add my 15-0s in. I'm going to sew in through 2 beads towards the center of my beaded bead. And what we're going to do now is go straight down that side of the original right angle weave. And in between the right angle weave rows, we're going to add a 15-0 seed bead. So through 3 beads, popping that 15 in the middle there, grab another 15. So through 3 beads, pull that in, and add another 15. So again, going straight down the line here, just adding that touch of that matte bronze, adding a 15, and then sewing through the 3 beads on the side of the original right angle unit. I'm going to sew down this side here, and then I'm going to sew down the other side as well to really pop out that center line. So I've gone through the whole project, adding those 15 O's right in the middle of that center line, and that pops out that middle line a little bit more, bringing those sides of the right angle back a little bit. It's going to be perfect for us when we do our rope next for the bead to slide on, and it looks really elegant and nice in those colors. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm coming out of one of those center beads. I'm just going to bring my thread and needle, get rid of that stop bead, tie onto that, and just weave back through a couple places in order to bring the thread end to the back of the project. Once that's to the back of the project, what I'm going to do is do a little bit of the super glue glue, get rid of my thread ends and burn them off with my thread burner. Then we're going to be able to go in and create our herringbone rope in order for our bead to sit right on. Now that my beaded bead is done, my little center slide, I get to create the herringbone rope for it to sit on. I like to wear simple things, so I'm going to keep this pretty simple, one color, and then just a little accent of gold to pick up the gold champagne color that was used in the beaded bead. Again, this is based on 2 rows of herringbone that are put together in a tubular fashion, so it's kind of as simplistic as you can get when it comes to a herringbone rope. I like the look of herringbone and I like the speed of it versus a circular or a tubular peyote stitch. Either would work though, or whatever you want to do. You could create multiple strands of seed beads or just have it on a cording bee alone. To start out, I have my needle here and I have a stop bead on it. Because this is a necklace, you are going to have to add a lot of thread. It's going to use probably about 15 to 20 feet of thread approximately, depending on how long you want to make the actual tube in order to hold the bead. Again, I am going to make it so that the bead can come off. You could make different beads to put on that slide if you do it in a neutral color. So that's something to keep in mind too as you're creating your actual necklace portion of your slide. So I have on a stop bead, again a white bead. If you want to, you can leave thread at the very end, about 10 inches, because we are going to go back and add our loop and our cut button to it. I'm not going to worry too much about that because I'm going to have to add thread, so I'm going to keep going with that. I'm going to leave about 6 inches at the end of my stop bead, just so I can add on to easily and pick those beads up very easily. I have my matte dark bronze out and then my galvanized dark gold in the 15. So I'm working with an 8 and a 15. If you want to, you could make a smaller rope working with an 11, 15, or you could take the 15 and delete it altogether. I just did a video on this simple rope more in detail, so that way if anybody struggled with this, you can go back to this video here, which does it in colors and shows you how to add in beads. If you need help with it, stop this video here, go to the other one, starting a tubular peyote stitch with 2 rows of peyote, or with 2 rows of herringbone, tubular herringbone stitch, and then you can come back to this video. But what we're going to be doing is creating that stitch. Herringbone is based on a V. So I have it here starting out just to show you that V pattern. It's based on a V pattern, and we're going to be doing 2 patterns of V's. One side and then the other side. And they're going to be connected on the side with some thread as well. Because thread is exposed in the herringbone stitch, that's where we're going to drop the 15 O's in, so that way it hides some of the thread. I'm still using the green thread, and I'm going to pick up 4 beads to start my stitch. I let that drop down next to my stop bead, and I'm going to go back through 3 of my beads away from the stop bead. That's going to leave 1 bead that doesn't have thread through it. This group of 2 here where the thread is coming out and the one next to it, that's going to be my 1 row of herringbone. The one behind it is the 2nd row. To advance this herringbone and to make it tubular, I'm going to continue herringbone stitch just like it is. You add 2 beads at a time and you sew through 2 beads. I'm going to sew down through the bead on the other side of that herringbone row and up through the bead that's on the opposite side of that herringbone. So I'm coming out one side. It's going to be the bead that the stop bead is connected to. When I'm there, I add 2 more beads. I'm going to sew down through the other side of that herringbone stitch, and that's going to pop those 2 beads in the middle. At this point, I want my project to go in a tubular fashion. So I want it to kind of bend up the ends. When I turn it to the side, those bent ends, I can see where I need to go. I need to add some more beads, but I'm going to have to go through 2 beads here. That's called a step up. I'm going through the row from the other side, and then also the first bead that I put on of that second row. So I now have 2 rows of my tubular peyote. I add 2 more beads here, go down the side, and then I'm going to jump from one side of my herringbone stitch over to the other side of the herringbone stitch. Add 2 more beads and go down through that side bead of that herringbone. When I get to the other side, I'm going to sew up through 2 beads, that row number 2 that I worked through, and then also that first bead on row number 3. I'm going to pull that nice and tight. That's going to start to get that herringbone look of that tubular herringbone. You see the thread exposed here on the sides. We're going to start picking up our 15-0 seed beads in our project. I'll go back then and I'll either take this out or just keep that little end empty, but I didn't want to confuse you too much and add those 15s in right away. Again, check out the easy video with the different colors if you're having trouble with this, because at first it's a little bit confusing to take it from a flat to that tubular shape. Now to add the 15-0s in, every time I pick up 2 8-0s in order to add to my herringbone, I'm going to put a 15 in the center. Go down my one side of herringbone, and before I skip over to the other side of herringbone, I add a 15. Go to the other side of that herringbone stitch, add the next 2 8-0s for the 4th row with that 15 in between, and go down through that bead on the other side. And you can see those V's starting to occur and that side bead. After I add my 4 new beads on my row, I'm going to do my step up. I add my 15 on the side, go back through the first herringbone or the first bead that my thread was coming out of on row 4, and then also up through that first bead of row 5. Continue on adding an 8, 15, 8 down through the herringbone row to add the 6th row here, add a 15 on the side, and I start really turning this whole project as I work with it. So the whole time I'm working with this tubular herringbone, and once you get the hang of it, it goes really quickly. I add my beads in. Oops, got an extra 15 there. Go down the sides. And you want to make sure those 15s that you're adding in between your herringbone rows kind of stick outward, but they'll almost automatically do that if you pull your thread tight. When you're on the side again, you add a 15-0, complete that row, and then step up through the first bead that you just added. It's always going to look like herringbone separated a little bit. That is common until you get to your next row. So when I add the next row, it's going to link those 2 beads. If you end up seeing thread on the side anywhere, then you know that you missed putting one of your 15-0s on. The 15-0s you will never sew back through any of the 15-0s. So you're only just using them to hide your thread. When you get to the side after adding your 4 new 8s, you go up through the row that you're working on and then the new row that you just added. You can see it'll just literally spin around in your hand and you'll work on it, and it starts to go really quickly. This is why I picked to do this as the rope, because it makes it nice and fast to work with. Whoops. Going through too many. And I'm just going to continue on going through adding my beads and continuing on with my herringbone stitch. As you continue on, you get this nice zipper look with those little beads in between. So you can see here it is plain, and here it is with that zipper look in between. I'm going to be doing this for the whole length, so about 16 inches, maybe 18 inches for my neck. And then we're going to add in our cup button as well as our loop, which we're going to make sure the loop is flimsy enough that it can go through the bead in order to put it on and off, since the cup button will stop it on one end. So I've gotten a little bit more than 2 inches done here, and the awesome thing is I can slide my Sonoran Sundial bead on there and you can actually see what it's going to look like. The herringbone rope is really nice because it's really slinky and flexible and kind of bends each way. And again, it is really quick moving. When it comes to ropes and actual necklaces, slow moving on pretty much all of them because you're taking the time to bead basically 3 or so bracelets that length. But I'm continuing on to do this, and that's why I'm doing it in pretty neutral tones and use that tone in the bead as well, so that way when I'm done, if I want to make a different bead, pop in one that has blue tones to it, I can do that as well, and it'll still all look nice on that rope. So I'm going to take that Sonoran Sundial bead back off and continue with my rope. Again, if you're having trouble a little bit with the rope, go back to the other video, watch that, and that will help. But I'm continuing to add my beads here and really get in the habit of holding your project, spinning it around as you're working with it. And if it helps you when you are working with it, when you're getting to your next row, you're going to add, I'm going to add your grouping of 8. So down through 1 bead, add your 15 on the side here, sew up through 1 bead, add your grouping of your 8 O's, sew down through 1 bead, and then if it helps you mentally to think about it, you add a 15 and you sew up through 2 beads. And then you continue on with that same pattern. Again, I really like to hold the project, twist it in my hand as I'm working with it. I've added a bunch of thread, and I'm probably going to have to add more. Like I said, anything that's done in a necklace form, especially anything that's done tubular in style, you're just going to use a lot of thread because it is a little bit longer and you're doing a lot of sewing as you're working with it. So you're continuing on, sewing through and up the sides. If you do miss a bead or you sew in the opposite direction, the 15s will really help keep you in track. I wasn't paying attention earlier and I did that once and had to rip out 3 rows because I was not paying great attention. And you will notice when you do make an error. So that's the nice thing about the 15 O's added in there. But I'm going to continue on making my chain about 16 inches, and then I'll add my clasp here, which will give me another 1.5 inches. So I might make it about 16.5 inches, so that way the actual chain comes out to be 18 inches. So continue working on and keep adding on to your herringbone rope. So I'm at the end of 16 inches here, which I decided based on my bead, I want my rope to be short. Also, I tend to wear short necklaces, so that way if I would want to put another pendant or something on the bottom and hang it and make the bail big enough to hang, it would still be the 16-inch chain. You can, if you don't want it to be that short, you can keep going. I did go into a second tube of my 8 OC beads, and you can tell I didn't really use much in the second tube, but kind of ran out just a little bit. So you will need approximately 16 to 20 grams of whatever you're using for your 8 OC bead. At the end here, I'm going to get ready to put my cup button on. The cup button is going to be on one side, and then we're going to do a loop on the other side. I want to make sure that this can come off and on. That way, if I want to add this one, or if I want to go back and kind of play around with and add my blue one, or again, add a pendant, I don't want the bail to have to be huge to it. So I just want to make sure that it's going to fit through that loop there of my bead. When I'm at the end here, I'm going to get ready to build my loop on one side, and then I'll turn around and I'll put my button on the other side. I have some of that Duracoat Galvanized champagne in the 11 O's, and I'm going to be using those to make my actual loop. I have those left over from my bead to bead, so they'll work nicely. You can also do the loop with the 15-0s if you want to do that as well. I'm coming out of my herringbone project here like I'm going to get ready to add my next beads in my herringbone. Instead of adding the beads, what I'm going to do is seam the project up. So right now it's separated. I'm going to go back through the 15 and back through the bead, not adding any other beads. Pick up one of my 15-0 seed beads, come to the other side, go back up like I'm getting ready to add more, and that pops that bead right in there in the side. Instead of adding beads, I'm going to go down through the beads, and basically I'm closing it up. Add another 15, and so back up the project. That's going to put a 15-0 seed bead exactly around all the way it needs to be. One more time, I'm going to go around the end of that project. So just around the last couple beads, picking up all the beads here. And that's really going to close it up. Once I've gone around again, I'm going to go through my project and come out one of my 15-0 seed beads that's in the middle of one of my herringbone rows. When I'm out there, I'm going to put on my 11-0s to make my loop. Again, when you're doing any sort of clasp or closure, you want to put on just enough so that it goes around your button, but not too big that it's going to fall off. Also in this case, I want to make sure to use my smaller beads, use 11s or 15s, because I want to make sure that I can get my bead or my pendant or something off and on, since I am making this rope to be used in a couple different projects. I'm going to put on about 28 seed beads to make my loop. If you want to, you can make an extender chain by hooking multiple loops onto the project. And once I have my seed beads there, I'm going to complete my loop by going to the other side of my herringbone stitch. So I'm coming out between my herringbone on one side, and I'm coming out here, you can see kind of down towards my hands here. I'm going to take the thread across, so I'm coming down on a diagonal, and I'm going to go through that 15-0 and the 8-0 that's there. That's just going to make the loop kind of sit nicely off to the side like that. I'm going to go around the project again, and instead of going through the 15-0 that I'm coming out of, I'm going to go straight up through all my beads in my loop to reinforce that clasp. If you want to, you could do a peyote stitch around it. You just want to make sure again that you're not making it too big that you can't get your beaded bead, or if you choose to put a pendant or a vivoli or something on it later on, you don't want it to be bigger than the rope itself. Reinforcing that. When I come out this time, I'm going to go the opposite direction. It's going to start to get tight in there, those 15-0s coming back through. And I'm just going to go back through one more time. Come back through that 15 if I can. And go back through the loop one more time. So it'll have 3 stitches going through that loop. Once I have those 3 stitches going through, I am going to get ready to do the other side. I'm first going to have to tie off my thread. To tie off my thread here, I'm going to go back through my project a little bit, kind of reinforcing that end. And then I'll go in and actually, as I get to the end, get ready to glue and burn down any extra little added pieces of thread. I did add thread 3 times during this rope. As I come out the end here, I'm going to go through an 8-0, and then I'm going to mirror and go back down my project a little bit. I don't want to see any extra thread, so I'm just sewing right along the thread line, going backwards. Now that I'm back down this thread line, what I'm going to do is tie off a little bit. So I'm going to come here to a thread bridge where you see some thread, and I'm just going to tie a knot going through the loop that I create, and that's going to tie a half hitch knot or a sewer's knot. Sew down a little bit further in your project. Again, going with the thread line because you don't want to see any thread. So I'm going down from the first row of herringbone to the second and so on. Go to a different place in my project and do the same thing. And again, I've sewn back down 4 rows now of my herringbone. Picking up those thread bridges then, going under the thread bridge, making a loop, sewing back through that loop to make your half hitch knot. Once I have that, and I've gone back through a couple times, I am going to tie or burn off the extra thread and glue a little bit along the line. I'm going to wait to glue until I'm done the other side too. That way I can do all of my gluing at once and glue back here near the start. But at this point I am going to trim off my extra thread. So that gets trimmed off. And then this extra thread here I'm going to use as I get back to the first side, where I'm going to take off my stop bead. And then for the first side here, I didn't want to confuse you guys, so we didn't actually start putting in our 15 O's until the 3rd row. What I'm actually going to do now is take out some of my thread here, and I'm going to remove some of the thread and take off some of the beads. This is going to put me back a couple rows, which I want, and it's going to take a couple beads off so that way I'm getting back to where I just have my seed beads on. So I took 2 rows off there, and what I'll do is close it up just like I did the other side, so that way you actually see the 15 O's. I'm going to take off 2 more here. Now we're down to where the 15 O's are, and I'm going to add those in just like I did the other side. I'm going to put a needle on this end, and then we'll get ready to add our Aztec gold cup button. So on this side here, I also want to close up the herringbone. So just like the other side, I'm going to trace right along the herringbone stitch. And in between here, I'm going to add a 15-0 to close up the sides. Trace right along the herringbone again. Add a 15-0 on the side. You can see I'm constantly spinning my project around. That makes it easier for me to work at it from all angles. So I've got all the 15-0s there now in right at the end. Same thing like I did the other side. I'm going to go back, stitch it all together, holding it nice and tightly. That's going to pull those sides in together. Once I have that, I'm going to come out one of my 15s, and I'm going to get ready to add my cup button. On this end here of the cup button is where my cup button is actually going to stop my bead from falling off because it's bigger. So that end's going to stop the bead from falling off. This end goes through my bead. So I'm not going to worry too much about, the size of it or what the clasp is going to be. So if you are using a different clasp, just one end has to fit through your bead so that you can add your bead or your actual pendants. When I'm coming out of 15-0 here, I'm going to get ready to add my actual cup button. On this side, I'm going to pick up an 8-0 and then one of my 11-0s. I'm going to go through the back of the cup button so my needle is coming out the front. As I'm on the top here, I'm going to add in place one of my 15s, one of my 8s, and another one of my 15-0 seed beads. I'm going to come back down the other side, and when I'm at the other side, I'm going to add an 11 and an 8, just like I did previously. Go back to the other side here and grab one of the 15s, just like we did when we added the loop. So it's just mirroring it when you add the button. And pull down and get rid of all that extra wire. And you can see then it's just hanging out there. I'm going to reinforce it by going back through it again. And then yet again one more time. If you are using cup buttons, try to connect and grab those 15-0s right away. Because they are domed, it's harder to go back through them if you're not going back through them right away. Oops, and my needle fell off. I'll put that back on. I am using a tulip needle right now because it was on my bead mat. And that's my biggest complaint about the tulip needles is that the eye is awesome because you can thread it really easily. But because of that, when you get to the end of your thread, it tends to slip out. So once I play and get that back on, I am going to add the extra thread as a reinforcement going through the actual project. When you are sewing back through areas too, you want to try to make sure not to puncture your thread. Most of the threads say impenetrable, that you're not going to actually penetrate them and separate the threads. That's a great idea, but they're all the same, and they all can be. Whether or not you use Fireline, whether or not you use Nymo, or Eslon, or Wildfire, they all do it, even though they say they don't. Once I'm through the top here, I'm going to come down just the other side and do the same thing here as previous. So back down through my project and do some knotting off as I go with those half hitch knots. So at this point I have finished up my rope, and I've gone in and I have about 5 stitches back on the herringbone that I was able to sew back through. Again, my rope is about 16 inches, and I'm going through now to the areas where I did add thread or where I made knots, and I'm just doing a tiny dot of my super new glue. Some people do not like to glue their thread at all. That's up to you. If you don't like to glue your thread, I would recommend sewing back through every time you add thread a little bit. Once I have my little glue spots added, a lot of times I will hold it off the bead mat so it doesn't glue to the bead mat, and I kind of blow on it so that way the glue actually goes between the beads and onto the thread. Once I have that, I'll take my thread nipper, kind of cut off the threads pretty closely. And this is the slip and snip scissors that I like. They travel well too, because they fold inside of each other. So once I have those all trimmed down, I'm going to go in with my thread burner and do my final step. This is the Wildfire thread burner, and I'm going to burn down those threads. Once I have the ends of those threads burned down, my necklace is complete, which is awesome. Because it's not a quick one. I mean, it's a quick moving rope for a necklace. Ropes tend to take a fair amount of time because they are long. Also, anytime you're doing anything in a circular fashion, it takes a little bit longer, which I talked about earlier. And missed that guy. And then I'll show you guys just as I burn down the last couple ones here. Once you have your necklace completely done, you can slide on your beaded bead. You can slide on a pendant if you want to, but then you're completely done. It's so hard with necklaces to show you how pretty they actually are because of the close camera angle that I try to get for you guys, but I'll kind of fold it over one another. Again, very simple tubular herringbone stitch, and also this awesome pretty beaded bead that sparkles and shines. You can do a lot of variations on it. You can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, you can make the rope in different sizes. So really have fun doing all of these different techniques, and hopefully it gives you guys some ideas, even if you're not doing exactly like this. But hopefully you enjoy, you get a chance to make one of these ropes. Nice to make them in neutral colors, so that way you can take your Sonoran Sundial bead and you can add it, or you can add a actual pendant onto it, so it's fun to play around with. If you need any of these materials, again, you can go back to the beginning of this video. You can go to the drop down the details underneath this video and get a link and a list there. Check out your local Potomac Bead Company store. If you're traveling, check out where they are by visiting PotomacBeads.com. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel, and that way you get regular updates on different products that we've got in, highlights of different videos, and such. So thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and have fun making this awesome versatile rope and beaded bead.